Ladies and gentlemen, strap in. Strap in. The biggest transfer saga of the summer has officially kickstarted today as Liverpool approach Newcastle United in a bid to take their talisman, their main man, their star, Alexander Isak, off their hands this summer. David Ornstein's reported it. Fabrizio Romano likewise. They want to take Alexander Isak and bring him to Anfield with the likes of Salah, Van Dijk, Florian Wirtz, Alisson, McAllister. I mean, how greedy. How greedy. The best just get even better. Liverpool, champions, and so comfortably so last season, now looking to make their place at the top even more foolproof. And in doing so with Alexander Isak, I mean, wow, this would be a coup. Alexander Isak over the last 2-3 seasons has emerged as one of the best center forwards on the planet. As simple as that. Cold hard fact. When he came to Newcastle 3 seasons back, we saw him as a really talented player at Real Sociedad. A player technically gifted, could play out wide, could drift in, very good in tight areas, especially for a guy of his size, but maybe missing the physical development he needed. A little lightweight, maybe not the most ruthless in front of goal when you looked at his numbers. But in these 3 seasons at Newcastle, he's gone from a boy with a lot of potential to a man with the world at his feet. Alexander Isak is a star, no doubt about it. You look at the best center forwards in the world at the moment. You're looking at Erling Haaland, goal-scoring phenomenon at Manchester City. Harry Kane, the picture-perfect, complete center forward in the eyes of many. Robert Lewandowski, even at his late age, still banging in goals at a high level for Barcelona. Those are who I'd consider the big 3. Some people will say Kylian Mbappe. I'm sorry, guys. I have a hard time convincing myself Kylian Mbappe is a number 9. In my eyes, this guy is a left forward, a left winger if you want, right? Like Cristiano Ronaldo, was he really a center forward? I mean, maybe towards the end of his career, but I never really saw him like that, even though he was scoring a lot of goals and was taking up a lot of positions inside the box. I don't view Mbappe as the same traditional number 9 as those 3 are. But I'm sorry, Alexander Isak will think to himself, and I think rightfully so, I can chat to any of them. I can chat to any of them. They're all brilliant. Don't get it twisted. Those 3 are world class, right? However you define world class, because there is no definition, but however you define it, those 3 certainly fit the bill, right? But Isak will be looking at all 3 of them and thinking to himself, I can chat to any of them. I can eat at the same table anytime, any day, any meal. Breakfast, lunch, brunch, dinner, dessert, coffee at night, don't matter. I'm that guy. Look at his track record since joining Newcastle. 20 goals plus back-to-back seasons. And seasons where, by the way, he hasn't even been super fit. Like he does miss time throughout the season due to injury. And he's still scoring you 20 goals back-to-back for Newcastle United. The first man to do so since Alan Shearer. More on that later. We'll talk about that. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Firing Newcastle their first trophy in over half a century. Carabao Cup, doesn't matter how highly you rate it. For a club like Newcastle, you saw what it meant for that club. Historic. And it's him at the focus of it nearly every single time. Big games against Arsenal. Saliba, Gabriel. Food. Liverpool, Virgil van Dijk, Konate. Food. Romero, Van de Ven. Food. It don't matter who he's up against. Isak scored against the best of them. And what I love about Isak as well too is how gifted a footballer he is overall. People will look at Erling Haaland and kind of point towards the flaws in his game from a technical point of view, right? He's not the cleanest center forward in terms of like, I don't know, maneuvering through tight spaces, beating players one-on-one. That's not his game. It isn't. What he makes up for is a ridiculous volume of goals, the likes that we've seen from maybe like 5 players in the last 25 years. It's crazy. But let's be real. His flaw, he's not the cleanest. He's not the cutest technically. Harry Kane, some will look at maybe his lack of acceleration, especially at his later age, right? He's not the quickest anymore. He's not the fastest. I think at times even the way he drops deep and tries to facilitate is almost a crutch because he knows he can't really lead the line as like the way he used to 5-6 years ago. Lewandowski, look, for all the goals he does score, I think if you watch Barca, he misses some that you honestly think to yourself, like a striker of this caliber, it's baffling how he does miss. He scores a lot because of his movement, right? But his finishing isn't Kane or Haaland, in my opinion. Isak, you look at him, right? And although you could argue maybe he's not as good a goal scorer as Haaland, he's maybe not as good a playmaker in terms of passing range as Kane, and his movement maybe isn't as good as Lewandowski's, it's very difficult to find a flaw in Isak's game. I feel like he has kind of a little bit of everything. Again, maybe not to the same extremes in some regards as others, but he's just so well-rounded. He's tall, he's physical, he's very good in the air, can score with either foot, can drift out on the left as he often does, similar to Thierry Henry. I mean, the guy's his idol, and you can see a lot of inspiration in his game. Very good at taking on players, very good at slotting players in, very good at bringing others into the game. Quick as well, too, and has an arrogance, a swagger that you need to make it at the elite level. The celebration says it all, man. The celebration says it all. And all that has led to Alexander Isak being at the focus, the fulcrum of a huge bid from Liverpool Football Club today. I mean, it's not a bid, right? It's an approach. They've approached Newcastle. But I'm sorry, there's no smoke without fire. And there's no approach without some kind of inclination that Liverpool believe they can get this deal over the line. And that's been the talk all day. And I want to talk about it, right? Because there's two sides. There's honestly three sides to really look at it from. From Liverpool's point of view, it is very evident why they want Isak. Quite simply, every team on the planet would love to have this guy. Bar maybe City, because that position is already taken by a guy similar age to Isak, right? But every other team, if they could cough up the dough, this guy would be the number one name on their wish list. Isak. Liverpool are in a position where for the last few seasons, they haven't spent the same amount of money as everybody else. And in conclusion, this summer, they've kind of been left with a war chest where they're signing Wirtz for 100 million plus add-ons. They're signing Frimpong for 35. They're signing Kerkez for similar. They want to bring in Isak. They've talked about Ekitike. Rodrigo has been linked. They've got a lot of money to play with this summer. They are a team that believe they can take advantage of the Isak situation before in a year's time, other sides could start sniffing around. And trust me, in a year's time, it will be sharks in blood-infested waters. Isak will be the name on every single team's wish list, and with 2 years left on his deal, everybody will want a piece of that pie. This summer, it does feel like if a team is willing to make that big money bid, and it is going to be big money, right? Money that this Premier League has never seen before. If you can do it, you're kind of left unchallenged because no one else can really cough up that kind of money. So it makes it really, really interesting. And I mean, Liverpool are close to perfect at the moment. They're a team that were so good in the Prem, and they have so many different weapons of elite level that can really hurt you. I mean, in Salah, you have maybe the best right winger in the world, Van Dijk, the best center back, Alisson, perhaps the best goalkeeper, Wirtz, one of the best young players, best creative midfielders, McAllister's a World Cup win. It's an amazing team, right? But I think you look at Liverpool last season, and maybe the one flaw that they kind of did have, bar, I would say, chance creation from numerous parts of the pitch, which they've addressed in their wingbacks and in Wirtz. But they really do miss a killer up front. Darwin Núñez has, in my opinion, been a flop. I mean, some people will look at the tally of goals that he has scored. It's not the worst in the world, right? Like, there's teams with definitely bigger flops than Núñez, but I think that's a signing that hasn't worked out. Luis Diaz has been another guy that has been experimented as a false nine at times, and I actually think he's done a decent job in certain games, right? Back the hat-trick against Leverkusen. He did as good a job as you could expect from Luis Diaz playing up front. And of course, the tragic passing of Diogo Jota. Honestly, it seems crazy that we're even talking about it from a footballing point of view when the pain is so fresh. It just happened so recently. But unfortunately, this is kind of what football is, right? It's a business. And in terms of replacing Diogo Jota as a footballer as well, too, that will have to be a priority for Liverpool. Unfortunately, that's the reality. So there is a hole in that position for Liverpool Football Club. And in Alexander Isak, he's the best on the market. Some might argue he's the best in the world. But that's a guy that if they believe if they can bring him to the club, that's the league wrapped up. And can you blame them? Look at the team that they're assembling right now. Look at the team that they had last year and how good they were. And think about how much better they look with this guy up front. Isak, Wirtz, and Salah. Are we serious right now? Salah, Isak, Wirtz. We're all properly deeping how good that is. All right, this isn't FM. This isn't career mode. This is a real life what we could be seeing next season in the Prem. Salah on the right, Isak up front, Wirtz inside left. We are in trouble. Everybody, we are in trouble. But that's the Liverpool point of view, right? And Liverpool fans are massively excited right now. And for good reason. Anytime your team is linked to a player of this caliber, there's cause for optimism, of course. But I honestly think a lot of it is kind of over the top right now. I'm not saying there's no chance this deal can happen. I'm not trying to say Liverpool will not sign Isak. But I feel like people are kind of considering this a deal as good as done just because Ornstein and Fabrizio tweeted that there has been an approach. At the end of the day, it's just an approach, and I do feel like people are kind of reading it out of context. David Ornstein's article reads, Liverpool have made an approach to sign Alexander Isak from Newcastle United. The Merseyside club saying no formal offer has been submitted as they are well aware Newcastle's stance has always been that Isak is not for sale. However, they have communicated their interest to do a deal in the region of £120 million. Now, I think a lot of people read the initial tweet and just thought, oh, Liverpool are going to bid for 120 mil. That's what Newcastle want. This could really be done pretty quickly. No, Liverpool want the player. They're willing to do a deal, Liverpool, in the region of 120 million pounds. However, they know Newcastle have no intention of even negotiating. They don't want to sell him. So Liverpool are willing to spend 120 million pounds. That is a fact. Newcastle don't want to make a deal. For Newcastle to actually concede that they have to sell the guy, it would take upwards of probably 140, 150 million pounds for them to actually say, you know what, we'll make it happen. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Isak has 3 years left on his deal. I think that's something that's escaping people here. He has 3 years left on his deal. So a lot of people are kind of thinking, okay, this deal was made to almost unsettle Isak, or to like kind of say, Isak, if you want this deal to happen, push for it, which is fair, right? But the problem is, I don't think Isak has that much power in this situation. Most players don't have that much power in this situation. 3 years left on your deal makes it very difficult for you to put the club under any kind of pressure. They hold all the cards in this situation, in my opinion. Unless Newcastle decide, look, we want to cash in on you this summer. We don't want to let you go for less than a year, or look, we're happy to sign some. Then, okay, no problem. But if Newcastle have no interest in selling you and you have 3 years left on your deal, I'm sorry, there's not much I think Isak can actually do here. Even if Isak were to go on strike, 3 years left on his deal. The World Cup coming up in the summer. Newcastle hold all the cards there. And people are trying to say here, right? Well, if Newcastle wait another year, Isak's going to cost less. Isak might be less than 100 mil next season. I think 3 years is a very healthy amount of years to have on your contract if you're a football club. I honestly think that leaves the club in a very healthy situation. I think anything less than 2 is where you start to play with fire, because 1 year left on your deal, players can start even negotiating with other clubs to say, oh, I'll leave on a free. We can negotiate something early, because then I can even get more wages because the transfer fee will be less, or it might not even exist whatsoever. But 3 years left on your deal, I think the club holds all the power here. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm not an ITK. I'm not a journalist. Well, I have a master's in sports journalism, but I'm not a footballing journalist in the sense of I have sources at numerous different clubs. That's not who I am. You guys know who I am. And I'm honest when I tell you guys I have spoken to people about this. Or I've said that in the past, right? And I never say anything if someone hasn't told me myself. I have spoken to people in the last few weeks that know about this situation. They're close to the parties here, right? Alexander Isak does have an interest in moving on to a bigger club, right? I think any player, with all due respect to Newcastle, who is playing at a club of Newcastle's stature and is of the quality of Isak, would have, of course, ambition to join the Champions League sides or title-winning sides. I know Newcastle are in the Champions League right now, but like constant Champions League sides or sides that are competing for major honors every single year. Isak is open to making that kind of move, from what I've been told. And if Newcastle had not made the Champions League this past season, which they were very, very close not to, on the final day, Villa, we all know how that went down. If Newcastle hadn't qualified for the Champions League, Isak would have probably left this summer. That deal would have probably ended up happening. Newcastle would have found it very, very difficult to keep Isak at the club without Champions League on top of that, because then really it's tough to keep a player of this caliber without even European football of the highest caliber. But they did make it. So Isak is definitely open to making that move. If he can join Liverpool tomorrow, he'll do it. But Isak also knows he doesn't really have the ball in his own court. There's a lot of other factors at play. And for a club to sign him tomorrow with 3 years left on his deal, 120 million, Newcastle won't even answer the phone. It's going to take 150 mil. Are Liverpool willing to part with 150 mil this summer? Perhaps they might be willing to. Clearly, they have a lot of money left to spend, and they have very sellable assets in the form of Luis Diaz, in the form of Darwin Nunez. That is very, very clear. And if they can get those two over the line for the fees that they want, then maybe they got that money left to spend. I'm not trying to say Liverpool won't sign him, but this deal is extremely difficult to complete. Extremely. And I think people are being a little dismissive of Newcastle in this entire situation. Newcastle do not have to sell Isak this summer. And on top of that, their interest, it serves them best to keep him. They're in the Champions League right now. They want to stay in the Champions League. They want to make a run in the Champions League, and they want to improve on last season. To do so, it serves them best to keep their best player, to keep their talisman. This is the best striker that they've had since Alan Shearer. Scratch that. He's the best player that they've had since Alan Shearer. Newcastle are not a club, when they were bought by the Saudi consortium, that had the interest of just being a club that buys players young and flips them for profit, and they're the new Brighton. That's not their interest. They were bought with the intention of one day turning Newcastle into a side that can compete for the biggest honors. That's why they were bought. So they aren't a side that just bought Isak for 60 mil. And now they say, oh, we could flip him for 60 mil profit or whatever. That serves us. No, that's not their intention whatsoever. If there is a fee that is literally what? I'll make you an offer you can't refuse, like 150 mil, they will sell him this summer. But honestly, and some people will say, oh, this is hopium from you. It's really not, right? I don't think Isak will leave this summer. I think next summer, he is as good as gone. But also, this is another angle to look at here. It serves Newcastle better that in a year, 2 years left on his deal, more clubs will be after him. And all of a sudden, that's when you can kind of make it a bidding war. Right now, it's just Liverpool and Newcastle. So if Liverpool say, we don't want to buy him for this, or this is our price, that's kind of what it is. But if next summer, Barca come in, Chelsea come in, I don't know, Bayern, I have no idea. I'm just naming clubs. You can say, oh, well, they wouldn't be able to bid more. I'm just naming clubs. Hear me out here, right? A player of Isak in a year's time will have a lot more suitors. Like I said, every club on the planet that needs a center forward will go after this guy. If that happens, all of a sudden, Newcastle will look at what West Ham did with Declan Rice a year ago when it was City versus Arsenal for him and pit the two of them against them. Well, we want 90 mil. City offer 90. Well, Arsenal, how do you respond? Well, we want 95, 100, 105. Going, gone. Sold to the highest bidder. That serves their best interests. But for everybody saying Newcastle are going to lose out on like 50 mil if they wait one more summer. Look, maybe they don't get 150 mil next summer. But first and foremost, think about it this way. Selling Alexander Isak right now severely weakens Newcastle. Severely. They're talking about Ekitike. Ekitike is not Isak. Ekitike comes to Newcastle. Their ceiling as a football club is not as high as it is with Isak. So all of a sudden, they might miss out on Champions League. That's huge money right there. Huge money if they miss out on the Champions League. They might finish lower in the league table. Every single position you fall lower and lower, all of a sudden, you lose money per position. Shirt sales. Is he going to sell as much as Isak? All in all, you are a worse club without Alexander Isak. So that money that you're talking about that they might lose out in a year, they might make up for it in that year as well too, because of how much more of a successful football club they could go on to become. Secondly, you look at Declan Rice a year ago, or 2 years ago rather at this moment. West Ham sold him to Arsenal for £105 million. At the time of his sale, he had 1 year left on his deal, plus a club option to extend for another year. So 2 years roughly, right? They still managed to get £105 million for him. With all due respect to Declan Rice, I think the market for Rice, while it was very, very impressive, right? City wanted him, Bayern wanted him, I get it. I'm not trying to downplay him here. Isak is easily going to basically demand a higher fee. He's an attacker. He scores more goals. I think he's arguably a bigger name than Declan Rice was at the time, even though Rice was a huge name, England international, I get it. Isak will demand more. Newcastle will demand more than West Ham, by the way, as well too. So I look at this whole situation, right? And while Liverpool fans should definitely be very, very excited about it, I do think they need to slow down a little bit because I think it's a very difficult deal to make happen this summer. I truly do. There's nothing in my mind that tells me Isak doesn't want this move. I believe Isak would join Liverpool if he could, but I don't think the ball's in his court. I think with 3 years left on his deal, he probably has to stand firm, stay pat another year, play in the Champions League of Newcastle. I think Newcastle, if they keep Isak, with the side that they're building, the side that they had last season as well too, the way they ended that season, second half of the year, they were one of the form teams in the league. I think Newcastle could make a real run at the Prem this season. I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I think they have a very, very strong side. A very, very strong side. There are worse situations that Isak could be in. And who's to say that if Isak has another top year, where again he scores 20 plus Premier League goals in the Champions League, he fires Newcastle deeper into the competition, which I think they're fully capable of doing. If Isak has another top year, man, what, you think he's actually going to go below 100 million next summer? No, Newcastle will still garner a huge fee for him, and they'll be able to really dictate the transfer battle that kind of commences with him, because there will be more clubs than just Liverpool. So, for Liverpool's point of view, look, it's a huge sign of ambition. If they're able to kind of get that deal over the line, wow, I think that might be the Premier League wrapped up. But for Newcastle's point of view, I don't think it makes sense to sell him. And I think it's impossible for him to leave for less than 150 mil. Or for much less, rather. Maybe 145 he gets it done. I don't know, right? But I don't think for 120 mil for Isak, you're getting it done. I don't think that's enough money for him in terms of what Newcastle will demand. Another thing to take into account, right? Because I think there's all this stuff that you have to really think about when you're looking at a player's price tag. The value of Isak, I think 120 mil, which is what Liverpool have approached with, is actually fair. His value is probably 120 mil. If we say Yamal is like 200, right? His value as a player is 200 mil. Mbappe, let's say 180. Isak is probably 120, if we're being honest, right? His value does not equal his price tag. His value as a player is 120 mil. The value to Newcastle for Isak is far more. And especially when you look at the center forward market right now, it makes him that much more expensive a commodity. Because you look at Gyökeres, you look at Sesko, you look at Ekitike, you look at Liam Delap, you look at Joao Pedro. They're all very talented players. There are question marks over every single one of them. That's not to say none of them could succeed at the club that they join, but there are question marks. None of them are particularly like hugely Prem proven. They've never had a huge track record in the Prem. I know Joao Pedro and Delap have played there, but they haven't necessarily lit the league on fire. They aren't international stars. They haven't lit the world up for their countries. They have relatively short bodies of work, or they're unproven at the highest level. For all of them, that stands firm. Isak, compared to all of them, is so far clear in terms of a product. Isak is Prem proven. Isak is a name that has shown it in Europe already. Isak is a name that everybody knows about. Isak's the best player out of all of them. So if you're talking about Ekitike, who today Frankfurt have rejected a 70 million pound fee bid from Newcastle, if Ekitike is worth more than 70 million pounds, I'm sorry, Isak. I really dread to think what Newcastle will actually demand from him. If Ekitike is getting rejected for 70 million pounds, I think Isak, that fee will go through the roof. If they're talking about Sesko for 90 million, Isak's not going for 120. Isak is not going for 120. Now, the one thing that makes this all very interesting, right? And I still haven't been able to work this out, is the Ekitike side of things for this, right? Newcastle want to buy Ekitike. They claim, Ornstein has reported, that they want to play the two of them together. I'm less than convinced about that. I am less than convinced. I know what 4-4-2 is not a foreign concept, right? Teams have played 4-4-2 before. I know they don't do it much anymore, but it's not a foreign concept. But the two of them are so similar, so much so that actually Ekitike was the player Newcastle wanted to buy 2 seasons before until he went to PSG. He was the original guy they wanted, and he's had an amazing season for Frankfurt, right? But the two of them are practically so identical in their style, even in their body, right? Languid, tall center forwards that like to drift out on the left, finish in a similar way. Ekitike is baby Isak. I don't see the two of them playing together. Now, I'm not Newcastle, so if that's their intention, by all means do so. But do you really sign Ekitike if you're not a little worried about Isak's future? That's the one thing I can't work around here. But in contrast, the Liverpool fans saying, oh, we have all the cards here because if you don't sell Isak, we'll just take your plan B. We'll just buy Ekitike instead. Okay. Newcastle would obviously rather keep Isak than sign Ekitike and lose Isak. They would obviously rather keep Isak, their player, their best player, their goal scorer, and lose out on Ekitike than sell you Isak and buy Ekitike, obviously, right? I don't understand that kind of point of view in terms of people saying, oh, Liverpool have pulled a blinder on Newcastle because now they have him by the balls because they can take Ekitike or Isak. Newcastle would obviously rather you guys take Ekitike. They'd obviously rather keep Isak. I don't understand that. So that side of things, for me, it still remains very unclear. I have no idea how that's going to work out. But as for the Isak deal, I think this is one that's going to drag into the summer. I think Liverpool, we've heard far from the last from them. But if I'm being honest, completely neutral here, I don't see this deal happening. And if it does, hey, we're all in trouble. We're all in trouble. People are looking at me as a United fan. Forget about me, right? I'm battling it out with... Who am I even battling it out with these days, man? Brighton? Maybe that's who I'm battling it out with. Forget about United, man. Arsenal, City, Chelsea, everybody. Even in Europe. You look at the big clubs in Europe. If Liverpool add Isak to this machine that they already have, forget about it. Forget about it. I was saying on Twitter the other day, I think this has the potential to really be one of the best title races we've seen in recent years because of how good Chelsea look and because of what Arsenal are adding and City look a little rejuvenated and Liverpool are Liverpool. I take it all back if Liverpool sign Isak. If Liverpool bring Isak to the club this summer, write it off before the season even kicks off. That's the best team in the league by a mile. That's how good this guy is. But I don't believe it's going to happen. Or I have to be convinced. Can you guys cough up 150 mil? If you guys can cough up 150 mil, this is the most ambitious football club on the planet. This would be one of the greatest transfer windows of all time. If they cough up the 150 mil, it would take to take Isak out of the club. Let's see what happens. Like, share, subscribe, guys. Let me know where you think Isak ends up. Is it a lot of noise or is there real truth to the rumor? Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.